This video is being prepared to demonstrate the service procedures for the sit-10 chair. The model we've got in front of us here is a fully loaded sit-10 chair. Before we discuss disassembly, I want to briefly go through all of the functions and adjustments for the chair. The first adjustment is under the front center. This is the tension adjustment knob. This is similar to all of our other seating products. If the knob is turned clockwise, the tension is tightened and the chair is harder to recline. Going counterclockwise loosens the adjustment and the chair is easier to recline. The next adjustment feature are the adjustable arms. These have a rotational adjustment. The arm can be turned and put in any position you want and it locks there. And it also has height adjustment. This is activated by the button under the front of the arm cap. The arm is raised and lowered and locks in whatever position is desired. The next adjustment is back height adjustment. This is accomplished by a ratcheting device built into the back assembly. There's no activation button for this. The back is raised and the device clicks. You can hear it as it goes upward. And when you stop, the back will lock in the position that you've stopped in. Raising the back full up resets the device and allows the back to drop all the way down. And then the back can be moved up and the ratcheting device takes over again. The next adjustment is seat depth. This is accomplished with a sliding seat mechanism. The activation lever is on the front left of the seat, underneath the seat. Pulling the lever up allows the seat to be slid in or out to the desired seat depth. One feature on this lever is it has a breakaway handle. If the user is confused over the function and pushes downward, instead of breaking, the handle just snaps away and it can be pulled back into position and the system is functional again. The next set of adjustments are the forward tilt and tilt lock. These are activated by the rotating lever on the left rear portion of the seat. Rotating the lever forward puts it in forward tilt mode. If the chair is reclined slightly, the chair can then travel forward, so you're in forward tilt mode. Moving back to the center position returns the chair to normal operation. There's also a lock feature on this, which is activated by rotating the lever rearward. Wherever you are in the travel of the chair, if the lever is rotated rearward, it locks in that position. If the chair is put in forward tilt mode, by activating the lever, turning it forward, now he's in forward tilt mode. In that position, he can rotate the lever rearward and make it lock in forward tilt mode. The last adjustment we're going to talk about is pneumatic activation. This is on the right side of the chair towards the rear. There's a lever. Pull up on the lever, the pneumatic cylinder is activated, and the chair will raise or lower. This is similar to our other product also. Next, we're going to have Eric walk us through the repair of the back height mechanism. We've got the main components for the back height mechanism laying on the table here. To the far right, we have two identical plastic components. Those are plastic bearings. Again, they're identical. There's no right or left-hand parts. Next to the left is a wire spring. This is the spring that drives the ratcheting mechanism. The next smaller component there is the lever. And to the left of that is the large latch. That's the plastic part that actually takes all of the loads inside the device. Now Eric's going to install the components on the chair upright. The first two parts he's assembling are the plastic bearings. Want to notice that on the bearings there are two pointed protrusions. When they're installed correctly, these protrusions are pointing to the rear and downward. Next, he's going to assemble the latch sub-assembly. On the latch, there's an axle molded into the latch, and the small lever is snapped onto that axle. Along with the assembly instructions that come with the chair, there's a detailed view of this device. And lastly, he's going to install the wire spring. The two ends of the spring are inserted into holes in the latch. and then rotate it into position. Now that subassembly is snapped on the two plastic bearings, and now you can see the latch is free to rotate, and the wire spring is pushing it back into the operating position. Also, the lever rotates freely up and down. Before we install the back, I want to do a brief demonstration of the function of the components here. We've got a back here that's been cut open with a window in the back so we can see how the device functions. Inside the back shell there's a series of teeth molded against the back surface. These teeth catch on the front surface of that latch, and each of those stops is what provides the height adjustment. There's also a track molded inside the back, and that drops over the upright bracket and guides it straight up and down. So now to install the back, it's inserted over the top of the upright and then pushed downward until it drops over the height adjust components. Now you can see the device functioning, and what happens is you run to the top portion or the top limit of the travel, the device resets, and now the back can drop freely to the full down position. When you start traveling upward again, the mechanism re-engages and catches on each tooth as it's moved upward. The clicking noise is from that latch stepping over each of those teeth on the way up. Now at the top limit of travel, two things are going on. One, there's a bridge feature molded across the back shell. That is running into those bearings. That engagement there is what keeps the user from just pulling the back right off the chair. Secondly, there's a finger sticking out of that bridge feature, and that is running into the lever. And when that happens, the lever is rotated, and that pulls the latch rearward away from the teeth molded in the back of the shell. When that happens, now the latch is away from the teeth and the back is free to drop down. This is the tool we've made for back removal. It consists of a T-shaped handle with a wedge feature on the top end of it. This is inserted in the back, and that wedge feature is forced under the bridge, and it pulls the bridge rearward away from the bearings. Also, about halfway down the T-handle is a small steel washer that's been welded on there. When the handle is inserted to the right depth, that washer will line up with the lower side of the upright cover. Now the tool is inserted in the gap between the lower cover and the back part of the upright cover. And now when Eric pulls upward on the back, it will ride right over those bearings and the back can be lifted off. Now that we've got a description, we're going to run quickly through the installation and removal of the back. Eric's verifying there that that small plastic lever is in place and in the correct orientation. He's got it rotated upward. That doesn't have to be rotated upward, but it is important to verify that it's firmly engaged on the latch. Now he lines up the back assembly on the upright and just drops the whole device down. And now the back's in place and we can hear that it's functioning. To remove it, he's inserting the tool between the lower cover and the upright bracket, pushing it up until that washer lines up, and then lifts the back off. Now Rich is going to show the disassembly of the sliding seat mechanism. We've taken the chair and removed the back and put it on the table here just so it's easier to work with. The first step is removing the two Phillips head screws that hold the front lower seat cover on. Now the front of the cover is lifted up and the tabs that engage the rear part of it unhook and the cover is removed. Towards the rear part of the control and seat assembly, there's a plug, one on each side. These need to be removed. To do this, he's just hooking onto them with a pair of pliers, pulling them straight up, and they snap out. Again, there's one on each side. These are handed parts. There's a left hand and a right hand. Also, removing these tends to damage the snap fit features slightly, so we would encourage you not to reuse these parts. Now that the plugs have been removed, Rich is going to activate the sliding seat mechanism and move the control forward so that the rear rod lines up with these slots that we've just uncovered. Now he's lifting the rear of the control up. You can see that the rod came up out of those two slots, and he twists the control about 45 degrees and the whole control will lift out of the seat assembly. All right, we're looking here at the underside of the seat assembly, showing the function of the sliding seat. When Rich pushes down on the lever, you can see the cross member moving there. When that moves, it disengages from the part that runs front to rear, and this is what allows the seat to slide. When he releases that, teeth engage between the two parts, and the seat isn't free to slide. Now to remove the assembly, he's activated the lever and pulled the long part to the rear of the shell, and now he's continuing to lift and pull on that, and the whole piece will come out. Now that the rack is removed, Rich is going to pull the activation lever up to the over-center position. You see when he did that, the compression spring dropped out, and also the lock is now free for removal. We're going to talk briefly about the function of the lock features. On the underside of the lock, there's a little V-shaped groove that's molded into it. That V-shaped groove engages with the teeth that are molded into the rack. So by pulling up on the handle, you're moving the lock away from the rack, the teeth aren't engaged, and the seat is free to slide front to rear. When the lever is released, the lock slides back into position, it's pushed there by the spring, and now the teeth are engaged and the seat can't move. Rich is going to demonstrate the installation of the sliding seat lever. Before we do that, we want to look at some of the details on the lever. There's a small axle type feature of pins molded into the sliding seat lever. There's a pin on that end, and on the other end there's also a pin. That pin has a bevel on it, and that angle was put in there to assist with the sliding into the pocket that's molded into the seat shell. Also, that beveled part is attached to a flexible finger. The intent of that is when you force it into position, that finger will flex and allow the pin to get out of the way and then snap into the mating feature. So Rich has inserted the pin on the back side of the lever into the mating hole, and now he's going to tap it with a hammer to drive it home. Now the lever's in place. He's demonstrating the over-center feature. Again, if somebody pushes on the lever instead of pulling on it, instead of braking, the lever will just snap down out of the way, and then it can be pulled back into the operating position with no damage done. Okay, at this point now the activation lever has been reinstalled and it is snapped up to the over-center position. Rich has installed a compression spring on the back of the lock. It just snaps on the post that's molded on the lock. And now the lock is inserted in through the cavity there so that the slot on the end of the lock meshes with the tab on the lever. And also there's two small windows on each side of the lock. Those are lined up with the matching tabs that are molded into the track. The compression spring is pushed down into the pocket, and now the lock is pulled over towards the center line of the chair and the lever is snapped back in the operating position. The next step is installation of the rack. You can see that the teeth are facing downward and it's lined up in its track, pushed down until it comes in contact with the lock. For the assembly position now, the rack is pushed all the way down so that you can see that the channel molded in the rear of the rack is directly in line with the notches on either side of the seat shell. We're ready here to assemble the seat shell to the control assembly. We'd like to point out that on the top of the control assembly there are two rods. We've got a rod running across the front of the control and another rod on the rear portion. On the end of these rods we have plastic bearings. There's a difference between the bearings used on the front and the ones used on the rear. The bearings used on the front of the control have a rectangular body with a cylindrical protrusion sticking out the end, and those are installed just by sliding them on the rod. The rear bearing is similar to the front except that it has a cylindrical extension off the back. That extension will mesh with the tabs that are bent up on the top of the upright, and that's what holds it in place. Now we're ready to install the control assembly on the outer seat. Again, Rich made sure that the rack was slid all the way forward so that the rear portion of the rack aligned with these notches on the rear of the seat shell. Now he's inserting the front rod into the rear portion of that slot. This is easiest to do if you install into this corner first. This is the corner that's opposite the activation lever. Once it's inserted in the rear corner, he gets the other side started in the front of the notch and rotates the control assembly so it's square with the seat shell, and then aligns the rear rod with the two notches in the outer seat and drops the control into place. Now at this point, the control has to be slid rearward before those two mechanical plugs can be installed. The mechanical plugs are installed. They're just lined up with the channels molded in the seat shell and then pushed down into place until they snap. The last step in the sliding seat repair is to replace the front seat cover. The tabs on either side on the rear part of the cover are inserted in the mating features on the seat shell. The covers drop down into place, and then the two Phillips head screws are installed to hold the cover in place.
Maybe put pressure on here.
Rich is squeezing the seat cushion up against the outer seat shell to pull everything together so the screws start easier. Now we're going to talk through the assembly of the tilt lock and forward tilt mechanism. The first component to assemble is the tilt lock plate. This looks similar to Improv and Improv HE, but it is a different part for this chair. On the front of the plate, we're installing a plastic pad, and then we flip this over, and now this plastic spring is inserted through the holes in the pad and snapped together. This is what the tilt lock plate assembly will look like with the spring on it. This part is inserted into the upright by inserting these J-hooks through the elongated holes that are punched in the top of the stamping. I get those started. On the back side, I need to compress the spring slightly so that the plate can tilt and get locked into position. This is the installed position for the tilt lock plate. Now we're going to assemble the tilt lock lever. This lever assembly is made up, actually I guess, of four components here. First, this is the detent. These pockets represent the positions that the tilt lock rotates into. This part is installed by placing it over the hole in the upright assembly and snapping it into position. It's a little bit loose there, but once the rest of the components are installed, it'll be held tightly in place. This is the activation portion of the handle. We've got a compression spring that slides over the end of this component. Now the component is inserted through the hole in the rear part of the upright over here. Once that's lined up, I'm going to slide the entire device over to the right to compress that spring and move it down so it's positioned, and now this handle is actually poking through the hole in this detent part. I'm going to move this over now so that I'm on the center hole. This detent here is positioned on the center hole, and now install the lever. And to install the lever, I just line it up with this activation portion and slide it in, and you'll hear a couple snap features engaging. And now once that's together, it's very difficult to remove without damaging it. If you do need to remove this though, there are 4 windows on the part, and if you get small pieces of wire underneath those snap features, you can hold them all 4 apart simultaneously and slide the lever out. Again, that's difficult to do, and if you're in a position where you're going to be replacing this lever, typically it's broken or has some kind of damage anyway, so you won't want to reuse those components. Here I'm activating the lever, showing that there are 3 different positions. Next, I'm going to install the front stop. Before I install that, I have to place this wire spring on the part. The front stop has a pair of pins molded in down on the lower part. The wire spring is installed over those pins. That's the front stop assembly. I set the wire spring into the groove there, rotate it, and you can see now that the wire spring is trapped in that finger. Now I snake the front stop down underneath these tabs, and there are a pair of mating holes, one on each side. And I slide it down until the pins on the front stop protrude through the holes. And now you can get a picture of what's going on when I rotate the lever. Now I'm going to install the extension spring. I start by hooking one end of the spring through the hole in the tab that's on this upright plate, on this tilt lock plate. The other end goes underneath the wire and then hooks into the pocket that's molded into this activation finger. And now you can see, as I'm moving the lever through its ranges of motion, we've got coordinated motion of all the components in there.